Hello and welcome to the video version of my journal. I'm Steffanie Rivers. Come on into the conversation. You might be watching on one of several platforms. I am multicasting on Facebook Live and YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So if you're watching, welcome to the conversation. Just wanted to change my headline. If you are one of the growing subscriber teams, please, I appreciate your support. And if you are new to the conversation, we want to welcome you to the conversation. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that when I post new videos, you'll be the first to know. So if you keep up with the news at all, you know the 5 people in that underwater vessel trying to dive to the site of the Titanic are presumed dead. Pieces of the vessel were found on the ocean floor, and now members of the U.S. Coast Guard believe that the vessel imploded less than 2 hours into its descent, around the same time that contact was lost with the crew. So the 5 people on board were millionaires, including the owner of the company that sponsored the trip, Ocean Gate Expeditions. So I do want to express my condolence to the families of the passengers. The company put out an official statement of condolences too, but will that stop the family members from suing the company? Can family members sue the company? Well, everybody on board had to sign a waiver form. If you're not familiar with a waiver, if you've ever participated in an excursion on vacation, such as going on a boat ride, or maybe you went scuba diving, or whether you went skydiving, maybe, or even if you've not been doing any of those things on vacation, but maybe you have had some type of medical procedure that they've had you sign a waiver saying something to the effect that if something goes wrong, then the people or the company doesn't hold any liability. So in the middle of that paperwork that you signed for an excursion or a medical procedure, even if it's something at the dentist's office, it says that if you're damaged in any way up to and including death, you understand the risks involved and you waive your right to sue for damages. So according to someone who saw the paperwork that the passengers on the Titan submersible were required to sign before the trip, the possibility of death was mentioned 3 times on the first page, this person said. 3 times on the first page, it mentioned possibility of death. So so could they sue? Probably not, but they might try. We'll see what happens. Now, mainstream media talked about how, and I'll go ahead and put up this picture of the 5 people that were on board. Now, mainstream media talked about how the company that offered the ride to the bottom of the ocean to see the sunken Titanic ship, they might have neglected safety protocol. And there were probably known issues with communication between people in the vessel and the command station above sea level that should have kept the company and passengers from taking the risks. It's another example of why I say this is white privilege. This is another example of white privilege. White people can skip all the safety protocols. They can make up their own rules, and they can call it frontierism. They can call it bravery. They can call it bucking the system, and nobody stops them from making life-threatening mistakes. But a black man trying to start his own lawn care company, he'll get the cops called on him by white people saying he looks suspicious, and he's just in the front yard with a lawnmower. So that's the reason why I think, in addition to all the other things going on, this was an example of white privilege. If you haven't already, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that when I post new videos, you'll be the first to know. Now, this is also why that when I watch the show, it's on the CNBC, American Greed. That's one of my favorite shows. I don't feel bad for some of the people who allow crooked white men to steal their money for decades. Men like Bernie Madoff, men like Michael Milken, called himself the Wolf of Wall Street. And in fact, Leonardo DiCaprio played him in that movie. Remember? We do remember Junk Bond King. No, that was the Jordan Belfort was the Wolf of Wall Street. Junk Bond King was Michael Milken. And then there's a new name, Steven Seagoras. He was a taxpayer. He was a tax preparer. He was an accountant, and he was a investment advisor. Now, those three roles are a conflict of interest in itself. There's no way your tax preparer and your accountant should also be your investment advisor, because for the reason why he's in prison now, because he probably stealing your money. Okay, so all three of those things are a conflict of interest. But people trusted this guy to do all of those things. And that's why he stole their money for at least 10 years before anybody bothered to check up on him. And the latest example of white privilege is Alex Murdaugh. Now, I know you guys remember the story about Alex Murdaugh. He was the South Carolina attorney who was just convicted of murdering his son and his wife, the mother of his children. Now, if you are unfamiliar with it, it was all on the news. It was maybe 3 months ago he got convicted, not even 3 months ago, because how it all started was in the end, let me tell you, in the end, he was found to have defrauded his own clients. He would take their settlement money that he got for them and either tell them, I didn't get the settlement money, I'm still working on it, but he would take the money and put it in his own account. Or he would say, I got some money, but I didn't get as much as you thought I was going to get. He would take a larger percent of the money and give them the smaller percent, knowing that these people needed money because they were victims of medical malpractice, or they were in a car wreck and they were maimed and they need their money to pay for stuff. He was stealing the money. Now, how was it that he was able to go on undetected? Well, it all started to come out because one of his sons was piloting or driving the family boat along with his friends, and a girl got killed on the boat. Well, then when they charged his son with reckless homicide or something like that, then everybody knew, okay, they're going to start coming to look at Alex Murdaugh and all, because Alex Murdaugh, the daddy, the white privileged dude, he knew that I'm probably gonna have to pay a settlement to the girl's family who was killed because my son was negligent, my son was at fault. So instead of wanting that to happen, because he knew for decades that he had been stealing people's money, and it was probably going to come out once they start pulling at one thread. You know how you have a thread on your shirt? Excuse me. You have a thread on your shirt and you pull that one thread, and before you know it, the whole side of your shirt has come loose, because that's what was going on with Alex Murdaugh. He knew that once they start looking into one thing, that's going to lead to another thing. So what was his remedy? He said, well, I'm just going to kill my son, and then that's going to stop them from looking at me. And so he killed his son. Well, he was convicted of killing his son and convicted of killing his wife, the mother of his children, and all because he was trying to cover up his white privilege situation down in South Carolina, where he had been stealing people's money for decades. Okay, so the only reason he got caught is because of his son. So otherwise, he probably still would be running through other people's money. So just because these white men wore nice suits and talked a good game, they were allowed to steal other people's money for decades before anybody rang the alarm. And speaking of money, the people on board the submersible paid the company Ocean Gate Expeditions $225,000 each for the trip. For what? For a ride down to the bottom of the ocean to see what we already have seen in documentaries, in movies, in pictures, and on TV. Okay? To see something that we already knew was there. That is my definition of got more money than you got sense. Okay? It was a waste of time and it cost these people their lives. So, of all the things that I've heard them talking about as it pertains to the people on board the submersible, one of the things that I have not heard them talk about is that these people misspent their money. And that's why, obviously they were rich people. And for them to have a $225,000 is what they spent each to go down in this for this submarine ride. But the minute that ADOS, African descendants of slaves, start to talk about reparations, everybody, including Dr. Phil, wants to know, what is our plan for the money? How will we want to spend the money? Make sure y'all don't waste the money. How we need a financial plan before we get the money so we won't waste it. That's how they treat us when they talk about Black people and money. But Japanese descendants from internment camps, they didn't have to have a plan, but the federal government wrote them a check. The family members of 9/11 victims, they got money and they didn't have to have a plan. They got a check written. The federal government wrote a check to Native Americans for the Trail of Tears. They wrote another check to Native Americans for mismanaging tribal assets. The federal government did. They wrote them checks, more than one. They didn't have to have a financial plan. The 5 people who died on the Titan submersible are being called true explorers instead of overindulgent men who had more money than they had sense. These rich people wasted their money on a ride to nowhere, and ain't nobody criticizing them for it. So stop trying to qualify African descendants of slave reparations by requiring us to have a financial plan for our money. It's our money and it's owed to us. However we plan to spend it is our issue. Whether it's collectively or individually, it's our money and we are owed that money. But one thing is for damn sure that we won't be doing with it is we won't be riding to to the ocean, to the bottom of the ocean. We won't do that because, one, we already have enough death-defying situations that we're dealing with right here. We don't need to get into a submersible to go find out if we're going to live or die. Okay. So, and since the people who had so much money chose to spend it going to the bottom of the ocean, and I hear that it costs millions of dollars for the search and rescue mission for these people, I would say charge their families for the search and rescue mission. Don't make it a taxpayer situation. Since they had the money to spend it, then their families should have the money to pay for the search and rescue mission, for the recovery and for the recovery efforts. Another example of white privilege is that if it was Black people lost at sea, that's how it would end. We would just be lost at sea. They wouldn't be trying to find us. But now they're going to spend more time and more money trying to find people at the bottom of the ocean. Can you imagine how many tens of thousands of slaves that were lost at sea during the transatlantic slave trade? And nobody bothered to go look for them. They just said, yeah, this is probably where they are. But they're going to spend all this money to go down here and look for these 5 white people. Well, not all of them are white, but they all are privileged, taking advantage of white privilege. And they're going to take more money and go down there and spend looking for them, when that's where they chose to be. And according to that paperwork that had 3 mentions of death on the first page, that's how they chose to die. So to find out more about the things that I care about, you can go to the written version of my journal. It's at eurweb.com. Thanks and